What is the biggest bullet you've ever dodged? Why? Please do like, share, and subscribe. Years ago, I lived in Vancouver and liked to go for long walks, beautiful city to do so. I was heading to a friend's first to drop something off and cut through a neighborhood with lots of Southeast Asian immigrants. The ones I got to talk to were mostly from Vietnam. I was aware of a van behind me, but it was midday and there were people out, so it was only a passing thought. A lady was working in her garden, and as I approached her house, she started to look behind me. Then she came out onto the sidewalk and started talking to me in her native language. I understood none of it, but her body language was agitated. She kept gesturing me to come with her up their walkway. As I looked behind me, I see 3 men getting out of the van, which is now parked just behind me. By this point, the woman has a good grip on my arm and has me dragged almost to her porch. She kept talking to me and pointing to stuff in her garden, and I just listened, nodded, and kept a good eye on the men and van. I don't remember how long we were there, but the men finally left. Both myself and the woman let out huge sighs of relief. She then patted me on the arm, said something, and then went back to her gardening. I booted it to my friend's house. On the news the next day was the story of a woman who was kidnapped and gang raped. The victim was grabbed on the next street over from the woman's house, not long after my encounter with her, by 5 men in a van. The men were distinctive, and the description of the men and van fit the ones I had seen. That woman saved me from something horrible, and I am forever thankful. My friend and I are on our way to a party in an apartment. I don't know anyone except my friend. Our guy comes from behind us in the elevator, walks into the party with us, and we don't think anything of it because we don't know many people at the party. I was 19 and drinking for the first time, and I was drinking to get drunk. I do shots with several people, including the guy. Eventually, I'm too drunk to stand, so I go lay down in the bedroom. Now, I can't remember if my friend was always in the room with me or if she came in later, but I remember flashes of the guy say he was in the army, that he could do anything he wanted to me. At some point, my friend calls for help. The guys at the party chased the guy out. Apparently, everyone thought someone else knew him. Nope. He just listened to our conversation and followed us into the party. The next day, I'm puking my guts out at home. My friend calls. She just saw the guy on the news, arrested for stabbing a cop. Guess he was mad he got kicked out of the party. If it weren't for my friend, I shudder to think of what would have happened to me. When I was around 12 or 13 years old, I went shopping with my grandmother at a dollar store. We left and drove the 10 minutes home. By the time we got home, the building was on the news engulfed in flames. They were repairing the roof and had a massive fire. 2 firefighters passed away, ensuring there were no remaining customers in the store. I think my grandmother still has the receipt. About 15 years ago, 25-year-old me had been dating my future ex-girlfriend for 2.5 years and living together for a year when we had the awesome idea of buying a house together. We ended up finding a fixer-upper house within our meager budget and had our offer accepted. When it comes to the home inspection, the inspector ends up finding some foundation issues, so we ended up walking away and re-upping our lease for another year. Within a year, she dumps me because she doesn't love me anymore, just in time for the housing bubble to burst. Best case scenario, we would have been stuck together underwater in a house while no longer dating. Worst cases range from foreclosure and bankruptcy to stuck in a loveless marriage with a couple of kids that hate us. When I had just turned 21, I went to a bar with some friends and wound up drinking more than I had intended to. I realized I wasn't okay to drive home, so I just decided to sleep in the passenger seat of my car. About 4 a.m., I woke up to a cop shining a flashlight in my face. He asked to see my license and registration, and then told me he was just checking to make sure it was my car, because sometimes vagrants sleep in unlocked cars. I had no idea at the time that you could get a DUI for sleeping in a car drunk. Apparently, if you do that, you're supposed to put the keys in the trunk or something, so maybe you can say you didn't have a way to drive the vehicle, but they were in my pocket, and he didn't even ask if I'd been drinking, even though I was parked in an area with a bunch of bars. I was stationed in Japan in the early 90s, US Navy. One night, after being out and drinking with my buddies, we headed home. Once we got to our final train station, I had to use the bathroom and told my buddies I would see them back on the ship. I came out to the restroom and started walking back to base. It was around midnight at this point. Out of nowhere, some sketchy-looking Japanese man walks up to and in broken English says, "Hey man, you are good looking. We are looking for white male models. Come with me and we will sign you up, make lots of money." As he is saying this, he's grabbing my arm and pulling me to a really dark section of the sidewalk. I yank my arm out of his grip and push him away and start running for the main gate of the base. I hear him yelling at me for another block or so to come back, make lots of money. The next day, I'm talking in the shop about what happened, and an older coworker of mine, who's been in Japan for a decade at that point, tells me that it is a common tactic to get drunk American sailors alone, then they rob and sometimes stab you. I was so glad my gut was yelling at me to run. I was involved with a non-profit student startup while I was in school. Kept working with them through the summer for fun to have something to do. I was the math person, running scenarios of different financial and business models to help project out our greatest impact. We had a mentor, given to us by the same accelerator program that got me involved. He stayed during the summer too. There was something off about him. While we as a team were excited about trying different strategies and models, and I was having fun making projections, he kept pushing me specifically to run a scenario we threw out a long time ago. It would have been extensive to model and quite time-consuming. Summer goes on. We start growing a bit suspicious of him because he was weirdly adamant about trying his idea and getting pushy. Finally, we approached our initial funding date and got ready to pitch. We met with some business professors on our own at one of our universities and casually brought up our mentor towards the end of the meeting. I'm not sure what the red flag was, but one professor recommended we look into him, so we did. And all got to talking and pieced together the details he let slip to us individually. Local court records showed that he had a long history of fundraising fraud and small claims disputes. Additionally, he was working on getting together his own nonprofit, but it looked far more like an exploitive scheme than actual altruistic work. Not only did that threaten our whole mission, but he was likely going to have me run his scenario, take it for use on one of his projects, and run without compensating me for my work. When you have skills that many people need but can't do themselves, it pays to be careful. My first boyfriend, and I use this term extremely loosely, was an abusive piece of shit. I was barely 18 at the time, and we got together, and by my own admission as a sheltered young adult, I was ill-prepared for relationships in general. I was with him for less than 3 months, but during that time, he did things to me that I now recognize were acts of rape by coercion. The turning point came when I had a brush with pregnancy that, thank be to fuck, turned out to be a false alarm. To say it was an eye-opener is a gross understatement. When I told him I wanted to break up, he just smirked at me and slammed my back into a door before saying, "No one will ever love you." He was the type of pickup artist player who worshipped Neil Strauss's The Game mentality, and looking back, I'm shocked that I didn't see the blatant red flags. It's disturbing to me to think, if that test had been positive, I'd have a 15-year-old by now with an absolute scumbucket. Absolutely the biggest bullet I've ever dodged so far in my life. Running to catch a subway in Madrid. Got one leg inside as the doors closed. At the time, 1978, doors did not open automatically if they didn't close all the way. The train started moving, and I was hopping down the platform. I grabbed the handles that were on the inside edges of the doors and eyeballed the clearance between the train and the walls of the tunnel at the end of the platform. Decided that the best thing to do was to yank my leg out. The doors took some skin off my ankles and pulled my shoe off, but I was okay. Somebody tossed the shoe out a window before the train got out of the station. A few years ago, I suddenly received a letter from my city's Office of Finance that I needed to pay all my student loans back at once, €11,000, because I forgot to hand in a document 10 years ago. I went to a debt counselor who really didn't tell me anything except that I was in deep shit. I then had to go to the bank and request the information I forgot all those years ago, but they told me they didn't keep the data that long. Went back to the debt counselor, and he told the authorities exactly that. I was lucky and they let it slide. If I really had had to pay that amount, it would have ruined my life. I can't even begin to think what I would have done. One of the colleges I was thinking of going to closed without warning within a year of me applying. All the students and staff got royally screwed over. We had a few of those former students join my school, and they said the day they announced the closure, Things were so sudden that both students and teachers were stealing computers and supplies to try and get something out of the mess. So glad I didn't end up going there, otherwise it would have fucked up all sorts of shit for me. When I was 14, my other 14-year-old friend got pregnant, and for some reason we were both so excited, she came up with the bright idea for me to get pregnant too, so we could raise our babies together, and I agreed, except I didn't know where to find a boy to get me pregnant. So she had her boyfriend have sex with me so I could get pregnant. Luckily, we got caught, and my mom made me cut her off and take a plan B. I thought she was the worst mom in the world, but about a year later, when I saw her and how tired and worn out she was, I just saw how much of a bullet I dodged. Ironically, it turned out I'm infertile. Florida man. We tried for a long time to have a baby. It was heartbreaking to not be pregnant again every month. Then we got pregnant, but at 24 weeks discovered the baby had passed. Fast forward several years, and I became a pediatric home health nurse. Babies who pass in utero often do so because they are incompatible with life. Had we found out a week earlier, we could have saved my baby, and that child could have survived with very little chance of being anything close to normal. I wouldn't have understood what a lifetime of potentially severe disability would mean for the baby, my family, subsequent children, etc. What I do for a living now makes my heart break for some of the families. They'll never have life again. They are homebound forever, and marriages do not tend to survive. It is tragic. Some families truly love their children. Others love but feel the burden. Others are disconnected and bitter. None of them really knew what they were getting into at first. I have 2 healthy kids, and I am now grateful for that first loss, painful as it was. When COVID was first ravaging New York City, I was an environmental consultant, and I was supposed to drive to LaGuardia to do N95 fit test for the NYPD and NYFD. I was living with my parents at the time and didn't want to risk catching COVID and killing them, so I promptly told my minimum wage job there was no fucking way I was doing that and got fired. The next day, I signed up for unemployment, started my own business, and now am making quintuple my salary. If I didn't have the balls to get fired, I definitely would have contracted COVID and may have killed my parents. At the time, around 75% of the NYPD had COVID, and New York was in really bad shape. Safe to say I dodged that ballet. Or bullet. Literally a bullet. Asked a girl on a date, and we went to the local indoor range. She borrowed my .22 and was having fun plinking when some ejected brass bounced off the lane divider and went down the back of her shirt, lodging in her bra strap. Yeah, red hot metal plus skin equals burn. Naturally, we both reached for the casing, but of course there was a gun in her hand, so I was staring down the barrel of my own pistol, watching her finger tighten on the trigger. I grabbed the barrel and shoved it forward while patting the back of her shirt until the casing fell off. She retained enough control to not fire the pistol, thank God. She suffered a minor burn, and I had the fright of my life, but all in all, it could have been a lot worse. We both learned a lesson that day and came off the wiser. About a year ago, I was 17 at the time and dated a guy who was 21. He was a close mutual in my friend group, and we dated for about 5 months. He convinced me to try and move out from my mom's house to live with him when I turned 18, and I packed the majority of my stuff up to be prepared for that. We were long distance, so I didn't really see him, but we video chatted almost every night, but it would never be normal chit-chat about each other's days. He would always be J-O-ing, and I'd say I didn't want to do that and just wanted to talk normally. He'd stop, but just start doing it again despite me being uncomfortable. I left him after he did nothing for the relationship. I've compromised a lot for him, and because he couldn't for 2 minutes just talk without touching himself. After I broke up with him, I found out he wanted to breed me of children, get a C-section for all of them so birth wouldn't ruin me for his pleasure, get my tubes tied so he could have my body whenever he wanted after I had all the kids he wanted, even if I was uncomfortable. Nice guy. There was this one time in middle school when I was waiting at the bus stop when this white van with covered windows pulled up. 3 men got out and started rummaging around. I went inside and told my mom, and she looked and said, "I don't see a van." Turns out, they got caught later that day after they were pulled over for swerving. They had an 11-year-old in the van, and they were trying to make her stop moving around. I'm so glad I went inside. Not really a big bullet, but it could have been. At my university, I was approached by another student. She was inviting me to a Bible study, and I really wanted to learn more about God and actually believe. I was born and raised Catholic and hated every minute of it as it was boring ritualistic worshiping. Anyways, I was excited, and it was going great so far. Our first session, we talked about what it means to be a disciple. However, this was the topic for the next 5 sessions. I could tell she was kind of beating around the bush when it came to me being in a relationship with my boyfriend. She made it clear the Bible says we have to be single until we find another disciple, basically saying my relationship is tainted with evil because we aren't married and sleeping in the same bed. I felt in my gut this was a cult, and turned out to be a cult. I even asked before agreeing to meet up for the first study if it is a club at the university, and she said no, but we've been trying for a few years. First red flag that I chose to ignore. At my last session, she brought a fellow cult member who, yet again, talked about what it takes to be a disciple of God and bringing up my relationship. They basically wanted me to break up with my boyfriend, who was the reason why I wanted to be baptized as a Christian, since he showed and taught me about God. I said no, and they bluntly said, then you can't be a disciple of God, and basically that I'm going to hell. The next month I found a great church and found real support in a young adult Bible study. Driving home to Long Island from New Jersey on the Cross Bronx Expressway, which is known for being a traffic-ridden slog, but not that day. That day it was smooth sailing. I was doing about 50 miles per hour, nearing the Throgs Neck Bridge exit. At that point, the Cross Bronx is many lanes wide, 6 or 7, with exits on the left, center, and right. I was in one of the center lanes, about 3 car lengths behind a guy in front of me. Another car came screaming in from the left lane and slammed into the car in front of me like it was a movie car chase, and he was trying to destroy it. At 50 miles per hour, you cover 3 car lengths, much quicker than you might think. I was sure I would plow into the back of one of them, but somehow they peeled apart and I drove right between them, touching neither. I don't know if angels exist, but if they do, I had one that day. Trigger warning, pretty gritty content. I was dating a guy that was posted overseas not long after we met. I liked him, so I stayed faithful for a few months, intending to stay faithful until he got home. I went off him because he was pretending to like things I liked. The last straw was him pretending to be reading Dorian Gray because he saw me like a post about it on Insta. I got a bad vibe, let him down gently and moved on. A couple years later, I learned that he came back to our country, got a girlfriend, and immediately got her pregnant, then killed the baby in a fit of rage because the baby was crying. He framed the girlfriend for it, but was ultimately found out. When I was 18, I met a guy online who I was so in love with, and I took a Greyhound from New Mexico to Oklahoma to meet him. He drove me out in the middle of the woods, got me naked, and duct taped me to a tree. At this point, I was a little concerned. I became a lot more concerned when he pulled out a knife and started telling me that he was going to murder me, and he wanted me to choose whether or not my body would be found. Out of nowhere, this little red pickup truck comes driving up this deserted road that we were on the side of, and the guy freaks out, cuts the duct tape, and shoves me into his car. He later would drop me off with his girlfriend, who he had said I was going to live with. She had no idea I existed. I left a few days later once I was able to get another Greyhound ticket secured, and to this day, I am 100% positive that he had planned to kill me. Black Friday a few years ago, I was driving my mom's minivan, and we had it full of family members, including my mom herself, grandmother, aunts, and cousins. We were heading home for the night around midnight on the interstate. I was driving in the far left lane. My mom hates when I stay in the left lane for too long, and I knew she was in the car, so I told myself to get back over into the right lane. Once I did that, about a mile or so down the road, a car comes flying past us on our side of the interstate in the left lane, where I just was. We later learned that the car crashed head-on with another car down the interstate and killed the driver and the occupants of the other vehicle. I was so shook up for the past few days, I refused to drive anywhere. A girl considered my one that got away. To keep a long story short, we hit it off, but right person, wrong time. And at one point, she was hooking up with my friend, lied about it, gave me the runaround, and ghosted me even though we hung out with the same people. Made the time she was with my friend very awkward, since we were incredibly hostile towards each other, but still felt sad that she ended up with him. After they broke up and he told me about her bullshit, I realized those were all the same reasons I hated her. That I wasn't the only guy she manipulated and played herself the victim. Turns out, I made the mistake of building her up in my head into something she was incapable of being. And she wasn't the sweet girl that got away, but a pathological, lying, emotionally unstable sociopath. And really glad I stopped coming around and allowing myself healthier relationships with some great women instead of what I consider the dictionary definition of toxic.